Well, she's not here, but she is part A of what is arguably the greatest crime fighting duo of all time. You know her from Nancy Grace, CrimeCon CSI, and a million other places when they need the best. Inducted into the National Law Enforcement Officer Hall of Fame, author, investigator, and a killer podcast host, usually very tardy, she is the great Sheryl McCollum. Joining our team for this episode, she is at the pinnacle of everything pop culture, whilst also brilliantly digging deep into everything true crime. Between the Outlier podcast, Corruption, Primetime Crime Live, and PopCrime.tv, she still finds time to share news and insights all over social media, including regular media with Nancy Grace, and she shines a light where few others can. She is the incredible Lauren Conlin. And joined live from Delphi when she's not sleeping in strange vans, which may or may not be on train tracks, and ordering blankets off of Amazon to stay warm while hanging out in lineups on the street. You know her from Morning and Weekend Express and on HLN, and penning a footnote about the final end to the Delphi murders, which were the focal point in her brilliant book, Down the Hill. She's synonymous with brilliant reporting on pretty much every news outlet around. She is the incredible Susan Hendricks. How is everyone doing today?
Good. You're so nice. I love those intros.
So nice. Oh my gosh. I need to write a book clearly, but Susan's book is so good. I forgot to tell you I finished it a few months ago. So good.
You guys are too nice. You know, it feels like so long ago that I talked to you about ordering the Amazon blankets and sleeping in that van.
You know what? Again, we talked about this a little bit last time because Nermi
Yeah.
was with us. What is involved in all that sort of stuff? I mean, like, you won't find anybody that was more involved in a case than Susan was with this one. Because when you and I were talking yesterday, you wrote that book in the year 2000. These murders took place in
2020. Yeah.
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 So to ride this thing out, and again, you and I in the summer we talked we were going to do something, and you were like, emotionally it was this and that, and the trial had gotten put off and all that sort of thing, and it's just been weighing so much on you, and you're so close to the family and all that.
I
What is
seem
it
like a
like?
basket case. I know.
What is
So
it like now to be able to, like, again? I said, "Are you going to write another book on it?" You said, "No, I'm going to write a footnote," and I was like, "That's going to feel so good because this is just a mission that's finally over."
yeah, it feels surreal after the verdict came down, and it was so stressful for everyone. I think no matter who's involved with the trial, it's those moments where you never know how the 12 jurors are going to decide and react. But when I first got here, I'm leaving tomorrow, 28 days, 27 days ago. So it was freezing, and I learned that Judge Gall, for whatever reasons, I kind of know, uh, there were YouTubers at one point during a hearing during all of this that fought on the lawn in Allen County, and she said enough. And she was very strict. She made it difficult to get in if you had the media badge, but they rotated. So you would have to wait in line all night, and it was freezing. So I ordered a bunch of stuff from Amazon, and then 2 days later it was warm. But so one night, it's the night before opening statements, and it was so cold. It felt about 25 degrees outside. I'm in the chair. I have like warmers in my gloves, and this young journalist, local journalist, so nice. She was laying on the sidewalk with heated blankets. I'm not joking. And she said, "I'm going to sit in the news van." I said, "I'm coming." And then I lay down in the back of a news van with like crumbs on my face. I didn't care. It was freezing. And I'm dozing. I'm falling asleep, and I'm kind of in and out, semi-aware. And I'm thinking to myself, she's so young. I think she parked on the train tracks because I heard a faint train. And then we're right next to the train tracks. I jump up, I scream, and then she screams. She was asleep. And then we both fall back asleep. And I'm like, I don't know if we're going to make it. I don't know if we're going to make how long this trial lasts here. So then people got savvy to it, and they had at least Murder Sheet. They were with me. I mean, you had to think outside of the line, and some of their fans waited for them in line. And then Judge Gold would like move the goalpost, so to speak. It was just a whole other story that sometimes I don't like talking about because it sounds like I'm complaining, but it was definitely an obstacle.
I'd be
I think
complaining.
it's
You're
okay.
basically sitting on the street for the last month trying to see how this whole thing's going to end. Now,
Yeah.
there,
I
there was
agree.
there was a bunch of chit chat and stuff about the DNA and all that. And again, I was in Vegas for some of it, and we were talking with some different people, and they were talking about, they're not 100%. And I was like, Susan was 100%. Like, you kind of called this for the last thing. There was no wavering, and I love it.
But there's one thing that really did it for me and throughout. So it's not no DNA was shocking. So it's not like I'm saying that doesn't shock me. It's 100%. This investigation was smooth all the way through. Absolutely not. And I think they did have, I don't know if secrecy is the word, or they didn't tell us much throughout. So it was kind of this perfect storm. But I will say, when I listened to the interviews with interrogations, this is with Richard Allen. There was one October 13th. He didn't think he was in trouble, or maybe he kind of maybe thought he was. So they called him in, and this was with Detective Liggett at the time, who wasn't sheriff, and who was it? Another investigator. I'll think of the name. But so they brought him in and they questioned him and said, "Hey, we were going back to the beginning. We found your tip, your folder. What were you doing that day?" And he's talking openly, and he's being himself. He's being a guy that I don't see in court. So it was shock. So when I shut my eyes, because I did, I could hear Bridge Guy in his voice, because in court he seems like he's shriveling up. He's lost a lot of weight. If I was on that jury and never heard of this story, which a lot of them haven't, and they said if they did, they'd be able to. They didn't know that much about it. They'd be able to make a fair judgment on this case and jury selection. But if I didn't know any of this, I would think, how can that be the guy in the bridge? Because he just seems like he's shrinking. I think on purpose that he was doing that. Well, in this video, he looks so much different. And then again, on October, I believe, 28th, when Detective Holman was interviewing him, his home had been searched at that point, and he was angry, and they went at it, and they were combative. And that's when he was arrested that day. Well, during jury deliberations, the jury asked to see what was on Libby's phone, because, you know, they have to come back into court. The lawyers have to be there, because it couldn't just play Libby's cell phone when they were deliberating. It had to be in court. So they wanted that, and they wanted the Detective Holman interview in October 2022. So I thought maybe they were trying to compare the voice, but that to me stuck out. And really, overall, if you haven't been to the bridge, to the Monon High Bridge, and if you don't know Delphi, it's hard to get a clear perspective, because we do hear, the girls were out hiking. And depending on where you live, it's nothing like, let's say, a California hike or in the mountains here. It's very isolated. And I think I would love it as a teen, but it's not very family friendly. Now they fixed the bridge, but before then, he was the only grown man seen, well, one other who had a camera around. He worked for the trails on that day. But no, it's very small, and he put himself there at that time. So I think that was the most damaging, and that's what Nick McClelland closed with in closing arguments, was the timeline and how he put himself there. And this is when this woman walked on the trail, and the timeline, you have to believe, if you believe the timeline, because it doesn't lie via cell phone timestamps, that you believe he's Bridge Guy. And that to me did it. And the voice. So it's a combination of things. It's not, this is a slam dunk on one thing.
Mhm.
Now, a quick question for both of you, because I'm hearing there was all these confessions. I don't understand why this got so complicated after apparently he had confessed several times. Had he not?
There's a timeline. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think that from what I follow with people's grievances about the confession, I feel like their grievances come from a place of that he confessed after he was in solitary confinement. But Susan, you can expand on that. I honestly, truly, like, I'm learning about this as Susan talks. So I only know it from a top level, but I mean, he was in solitary for 13 months, something like that, which is pretty horrible, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it. So
Yeah. And I think that it is, and I didn't think it should be there, but it depends on who you ask. That I know the warden was up there on the stand, and he said that never in his history had someone who hadn't been convicted been in that prison. And I thought that was the biggest obstacle they were going to face, honestly. But there is a timeline that I have about the confessions, and one was on April 3rd, 2023. I have it here. And then April 13th, 2023. So when Kathy hung up and said, "Don't say that, that's not you, you're not making sense," apparently he was not in a psychotic, if that's even the correct term. There was no psychosis, which is what they are claiming,
Right.
the defense. He was in psychosis. He knew nothing what he was saying. But if you follow the timeline of what the state is alluding to, is that he started to confess. His wife and mother hung up with him, called the attorneys, and said, "What's happening?" They had a a doctor visited him at prison claiming he had psychosis, and then they filed for an immediate to switch him from that prison, to get him out of that prison. I wish Sheryl was here. She's so much more articulate with this on the timeline of the prisons. But
this makes a lot of sense to me. So he was in solitary for how many months before he made that confession? And just for my own knowledge, I'm trying to understand. And they said that during this confession, he was not experiencing a psychotic break.
Right. And then, yeah. And the best
Okay.
thing about this trial was that jurors could ask questions. So you kind of got a sense of how they were feeling, and they really asked intelligent questions. And the doctor that was working with Richard Allen at that time, he was just on the stand like 5 days ago. And he said that a question was, can you go into a psychosis, have a psychotic state, and then go back to being quote unquote normal? And the answer was yes. But the first time that Richard Allen confessed, he was not in psychosis. And I don't know if he was in that particular prison, but there's also people who argue that he was not in solitary confinement, that he had time with Dr. Walla, that he had time. So it depends on, I don't think it was the place for him. He was not convicted. He shouldn't have been there. But I don't think that explains away all of the confessions. And we heard them in court. So you hear him say, I just want to tell you I did it, like that. And she said, no, you don't. Yes, I did. And then to his mom, I want to tell you that I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. Oh, no, don't speak like that. Mom, why would I tell you something I did if I didn't do it? As calm as that.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. No, I guess you're not a prison expert, but what constitutes solitary exactly? Like, is it you really get no breaks all day and you're only in one place all day, every day? Or is it like you do get to go out for an hour to see a doctor, then you go back? Like, I don't even know what that entails.
Me either. And that was a back and forth, because that was a big contention. That was a couple of days, because he said, is it true that, I think it was the warden, and it was McClellan saying, doesn't he get to go out? Yes, he does. But cross-examination, he's like, Rosie said, well, that's like a little cage, right? And the warden is solid on the stand. You can imagine. I'm sure he's testified a lot. He says, well, it is prison. Yeah, well, he's not out in general population. Yeah, but well, it is prison. And they are explaining a way that he needed to be there for safekeeping, because the high profile case he was part of course, he is part of, and that he was a suicide risk, saying he wanted to hurt himself. But the timeline I have, and I wish I could email this to you, and I will, because it's laid out, and it's from a friend of mine, Fig Solves, who has a YouTube page, and it lays it out exactly when he confessed, where he was, what happened after, the emergency order, the attorneys, all of a sudden he's eating paper. So the state is saying he's faking this. As soon as his attorneys got word that he confessed, they went into fast motion. They got the doctor to say he's in psychosis. They filed an emergency. He's got to get out of that prison. And the state is saying, we believe him. And the defense is saying he did it because he was tortured.
Well, I just want to go back a second, because we always say with this candy-ass generation of younger people now, okay, he was in solitary, but you're being accused of killing 2 children. Like, what exactly do you want? And like you said, with the warden and all that, I mean, there would be an expectation here that, okay, whether you're a suicide risk or not, all fingers are pointing to you that you're a monster. And, this is why places like solitary confinement exist.
Yeah, I had this, not argument, but discussion in our long lines with people online. And I don't feel like he should have been there, because to me that it's not the rules. It's not what we play by in America. And he wasn't convicted. I don't think he should be there. I think it gave the defense an argument to be had, and they did have it.
Well, to see, and I'm tempted to agree with you, because obviously you guys are 2 of the smartest people I know, because I can guarantee in a lot of cases there was, people that were innocent, that were kind of treated the same way. But again, from what I knew about this, and Susan, I mean, this is the 3rd time you've been on. The first time that you were on, you walked us through how they broke this whole investigation down. I mean, it would be hard not to assume that it was him by the time he was arrested.
Yeah. And he almost got away with it. He did. And I believe, based on the timeline of what I've learned, and we've learned different things throughout the trial that we didn't know during the investigation, was that they released investigators soon after the death of Abby and Libby the still shot of the bridge guy on Libby's phone, taking it from the video. And that was released. And 2 days later, he went in to the sheriff's department and said, hey, I'd like to put in a tip. I was down there, but I didn't see Abby or Libby, or I didn't see much. So then Dan Doolin, conservation officer, calls him. We weren't exact on this timeline throughout the investigation, and says, hey, can we come down to the sheriff's station again? He said, no, I can't. I'm running errands, but I'm in this grocery store parking lot if you want to meet me here. He met Richard Allen there, took it down. Richard Allen Whiteman, he lives on Whiteman Drive. He files it away or puts it, I don't know where he put it, but it ends up in a box, and it said on there, cleared. So it was cleared. Now, I think this was Delphi being such a small town, and monsters don't look like monsters. And if he said, hey, I have a daughter who recently got married. I mean, this guy, he's in Delphi, he's a resident there, town of less than 3,000 people, saying I was down there, I didn't see much. Fast forward, thank goodness, Kathy Schenck, who is in court every single day, just powerhouse of a woman. She was a volunteer. They were moving buildings, and because remember that they moved the investigative process to another building at one point. So she's looking through the boxes and the files and sees this, and lived in Delphi her whole life, and said, I've never heard of an Allen Drive, but there's a Whiteman Drive. Brings it to the attention of the authorities, and that's how they found it. It was a misplaced tip. It really just was. It was filed away, and Dan Doolin was on the stand, and I think this is where a small town can hurt you. Because if people don't understand just how small it is, they think, well, then why can't they catch the guy? It's because his face was pixelated and blurry. There are a lot of people in Delphi that look like that guy in the bridge. A lot. 99% of them. They could be older or younger.
And everybody knows them. And you assume with the small town, you have that familiarity about like nobody here could do that.
Yeah. And he works in CVS, and he's unsuspecting. But because of that tip, if that tip didn't come along, I mean, obviously, clearly, he got away with it for so long. But I think if Libby didn't record that on her phone, and if they didn't put out that still shot, he would have never come forward and said, hey, I was down there. But he made a big mistake in 2022. I remember the name, Steve Mullins and Liggett were interviewing him. And they said, hey, do you remember what you were wearing that day? And he goes, well, I have jeans, probably blue jeans, a blue Carhartt or black Carhartt jacket, maybe blue or black. I mean, and a lot of people in Delphi, men, have that outfit, the uniform. So, but he did say, he put himself on the bridge. And then Liggett said, that still said, is this you? And we're listening in court. It's clear as day. Some of the confessions were hard to hear. But this, he said, it isn't if the girls took it. If Abby and Libby took that picture, it's not me. Oh, and it is if anyone else took it. So if
that's not an answer.
No,
yeah, that's not. Yeah.
And that's why I do wish there were cameras in the courtroom so you could see what I see. Because if you didn't see that and you just hear no DNA and confessions when he was in solitary, and I understand where the shift is. I do.
People would really benefit from hearing you say all this with all this great detail, because I feel like we don't get that. We really don't. We don't get it from the articles, and we certainly don't get it from a lot of defense attorneys. And I am not blaming them at all, because if I don't want to say trained in one way, that is where my brain would go. I would just be picking at all the reasonable doubt all over the place. I wouldn't necessarily be looking at it from a different perspective. So I think that, that says a lot. You should really consider doing just a full deep dive on this.
Well, we did a panel. It was Tom Webster, who has a page on YouTube, and there's like 10 of us in this panel, and 6 of us had been in court together. We were joking around because we feel like we've been through it. When you're together for a month, you feel like you know each other very well. And all of the comments say, I haven't heard this side. It's usually all defense. It's so true. I mean, you just don't. And the comments below, some of them were saying, why do you have a panel that's all one-sided? And he said, I honestly didn't know how they felt. We see each other in court. Tom was there for a little while. And then we're not allowed to talk, and then we leave. But we all understood that we all had the same perspective from inside of that courtroom. And that's why they said it's a breath of fresh air. Where I think it's dangerous is if you're feeding this, you're defense attorney or not, and you're in that courtroom and you know what you know, and you're not telling it. And maybe that's confirmation bias. It's complicated, but I believe they made the right decision finding Richard Allen guilty.
Well, I also think, I don't want to point fingers here because Cheryl's just messaging now. She's going to hop on in a sec. This is kind of a question for her, but the reason I think this should have been on camera, and why I love that Susan's telling the story and all that, is this all kind of stems from bad CSI work. Again, from when you see like the investigation took way too long. It seems like, this would be a good lesson to show people, small town or not. Okay, maybe they weren't, in the position to have a whole CSI team or whatever down there, but again, I love that you're telling this story and that all this information is coming out, especially throughout the trial and the DNA and the hair and all that sort of thing, because I really think that this is one of those isolated cases where I think people can learn a lot from handling the investigation properly from the beginning.
Absolutely. Mistakes were made 100%. And with the hair, but there's also, I think, the Odinist, the Odinist theory disguised as a Frank's, that they wanted a Frank's hearing to say, hey, Liggett shouldn't have searched his home. And then all of that bizarre theories about what happened, and some of it feeling like intern Max, who was on the stand, by the way, as part of the defense team. That's his intern Max. He was the intern. Put it together because none of it made sense to me. And what that did is add fuel to the fire here of like, okay. And Judge Gull said time and time again, you can allow this in if you can bring me some proof. You can't just say a guy's name and say he's an Odinist and he was down there. So nothing connected these men. She said, if there's proof, bring him in. I think they should have just stuck with the police work and poked holes in that instead of the whole Odinist theory, because I'm seeing I see a different side of this. And so when I see people on social media or TikTok going, something's up, I feel bad. It's not up. It was a fair trial. It truly was.
Yeah, and you witnessed it firsthand. I think for me, it's like I listened to my co-host Jarrett, who is a prosecutor, who says things like, well, as a prosecutor, I'm going to let everything in at this point. I don't care because I don't want any reason for
True.
the defense to appeal or
Yeah.
for them to say he didn't get a fair trial. But you saw it, you think that he got a fair trial, and a lot of people feel that way as well. So it is so confusing, but I understand that if there was no proof to this Odinism, I mean, this sounds psychotic, what I'm about to say, but I'm just going to say it anyway. But when that was brought forth, I did think of the fact that one of the little girls' name was Abigail Williams. It's TheCrucible. It's the girl that's a witch. Do you remember?
No.
No? You never read Arthur Miller you guys in high school, you didn't read
Probably
that?
the Cliff Notes.
Closest I got was
I
watching
mean,
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
No, but I did sort of get this like the chills kind of came over my body because I was like, Abigail Williams, that's just a very well-known name of the girl that said that everybody was witches. So I just was like, oh, but anyway, hi, Sheryl.
As far as I know, she was not a witch, but Susan would know better than me.
No, I understand what she's saying. They
You know what I'm
dropped
saying?
that.
I just got chills when that came about. So
Well,
all.
that's how dangerous it is to just drop
Yeah.
that and walk away because it's Cheryl, help.
Sheryl McCollum, everybody.
Hey,
How's it
No,
going?
but that's all that I mean, and listen, I know nothing else about that, and I don't think I've ever said that out loud before.
No, I
I think
understand.
now that the trial's over, I was like, wow, I did think of that. Sheryl, I was saying that when the defense introduced Odinism and they weren't allowed to use that,
Yeah.
I thought for a minute, and again, I just swallowed it. I didn't say it out loud. But did you read The Crucible or see The Crucible?
no.
What? Guys, okay, well, I
Lauren's
swear
not
I'm not.
crazy, believe.
Abigail Williams is the main character in The Crucible based on a real character. She was the girl that accused everybody of being witches, but she
Okay.
was, yeah. So anyway,
We
that's why
believe
I
you.
was like, oh my gosh,
there was a gag order, and these lawyers wanted around it, and they wanted to taint potential jury, the jury pool, and it worked. It almost worked. I believe that thank goodness that they were sequestered and they were taken from Allen County, because a lot of people have come up to me and said, I think it could be an Odinist in the woods. I mean, and that's the damage they did without proof.
oh wow, okay.
Work. It was never going to work. It was too ludicrous. It is baseless. There's no facts. There's no history. There's nothing that could not tie anything to it.
Mhm.
It was the most asinine thing I've heard in a long time.
So
Things they could legitimately used, but not Odinism.
See, from what I understand with a lot of these defense cases in that situation is this wasn't an either or case. You're saying it wasn't him, it was somebody else.
Right.
Where again, we just talked about it, Cheryl, right before you hopped on, was I think a lot of this mystery could have been eliminated had the CSI work been done better. And is that
But I
correct?
just think there was no DNA there, right, Cheryl, if I'm not wrong? Like, I don't
There's
know
no-
if it,
There's no fingerprints. Listen,
yeah.
Coffin Daffer and I had the same conversation. And she was like, but there's no, there's no hair of his, there's no fingerprint, there's no DNA, there's no seminal fluid. I said, but yet somebody pulled this off. So no matter who the killer is, that would be true.
Right,
Yeah.
it's not a ghost. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheryl told me, and Coffin Daffers told me, there's always DNA. There's something. You touched something.
You would think that, but listen to me. He gave you the answer in his confession.
He said, I did it.
He said, I did it, but he gave you the answer to why there's no DNA.
Why?
And it's twofold. One, he walked them through the river. Two, he said, I got spooked and couldn't finish.
Oh, God.
Oh, you mean about he assaulted them, you mean?
Yeah.
And he was ready. He had stuff in his jacket. He was ready for this. He intended to go down there. He said to, during one of his confessions, this was Dr. Walla, and it was an investigator on the stand who listened to all his confessions, went through the file, and he said, and Cheryl, remember this, when he said word for word exactly what Bridge Guy said, what Richard Allen said, that he was laying in wait, he followed them on the bridge, he walked them down the hill, the intent was to rape them, he got spooked by a white van, he forced them across the creek, and I hate saying this nonchalantly, it's tough to say, but he slit their throats, he made sure they were dead so they didn't suffer, according to him, and he walked a certain way so no one would see him, and then he continued to live his normal life. His words. He took us through that.
Dear God. So Cheryl, in that situation, like we're talking boot marks, I mean, you guys have walked the scene a million times. So is there a lesson here for a similar case or something else from a CSI perspective that could say, you know what, like, again, I thank God they eventually got him, but Susan's walked us through the way that this investigation worked out.
I
a million
think
times.
the best of my ability, Cheryl's better than me, but I really don't think it was there. I don't think the CSI botched it. He didn't leave DNA. It's in the woods. And maybe I'm wrong, Cheryl, if that's the way
It's
to
harder in the
describe.
woods, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Listen, anytime you have an outdoor scene, it's going to be but difficult when you've got, and I'll take Wayne Williams. So Wayne Williams was accused of killing children in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
Just thrown out in the woods. Then he got a little smarter. He put some in abandoned buildings. And then it came out, it was leaked that a lot of the children had similar fibers. Next thing we know, he's throwing them into the Chattahoochee River. So he learned what to do to get rid of trace evidence. Well, we see that here. He could have taken them a different way. He chose to make them cross in at least waist deep water. Why would he do that?
And it looked like his jacket was full, like he was ready for this. And isn't it funny, as a society back during the OJ trial, we weren't ready for DNA. So we just, the jury kind of zoned out and didn't even listen to it. Now we expect it. We want it there. It has to be there.
Susan, you're so right. Oh my gosh, that's such a great point. I'm one of those people because I didn't really pay attention as much to trials 20 years ago because I just didn't care, to be frank.
Yeah.
But now you're so right. If there's no DNA, I'm like,
And the
what the hell?
prosecutor
That's it, because
said,
that's
Nick
all I'm used
McClellan
to.
said,
That's what I'm used to.
during jury selection, he brought this up. So it was the first time I've ever witnessed jury selection. I'm so glad. I learned a lot. But Nick McClellan said, how many of you think that have seen CSI? And there's a lot of people that raise their hand. How many of you think you need it to solve a case? So he was telling you, I don't have DNA. We don't have it.
That's amazing. That's a great question
And
for
then
a juror.
what the defense said, if you hear someone say something, are you going to believe it, or could they be depressed or under duress? So you thought the confessions are what's most bothering them.
And here's the thing, y'all.
Super interesting.
How many people were convicted of murder in the 60s, 70s, 80s before we ever had it. You
Yeah.
can work a homicide without DNA. You
True.
should,
Right. And witness testimony was the biggest thing. And they have that right there. They have a video. So there you go. This wouldn't even be, we wouldn't be talking about this, I guess, if it was the 80s, 90s, whatever.
Well, he would have gotten away with it.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess you're right. I guess you're right.
Yeah, but
That's really sad.
you guys all bring up a great point. You do expect an open and shut case now because, again, we talked about it with Coffindaffer. She said it the same way. It's like police work now is a lot different than it was back then because, again, the CSI team goes in there and it's okay, Sheryl, you have to do the heavy lifting on this one. We'll come in, we'll grab a couple of suspects. You tell us who did it. We'll get them to confess, and that'll be it. Where now, again, this is one of those cases. I mean, had they have been murdered indoors, I would imagine this would have been a lot quicker. But when it's outside, it's like, this has been going on for years now. And then,
And Sheryl talked about this, and she said that who else is Bridge Guy? He put himself there, and he said he was there, and he never saw Bridge Guy, and he said he wasn't Bridge Guy, but he was wearing the same outfit, and it was him. He doesn't have an alibi for that day. According to the confessions, he said that he was at his parents' house. He was supposed to have lunch with them, decided not or didn't want to, bought a 6-pack, had 3 beers, and went down to the bridge. There's no other explanation for it. He was off that day from CVS. I personally don't think he was targeting Abby and Libby. I think it was wrong place, wrong time.
which is worse. Like, it's just unbelievable.
but you
So
know,
sad.
things for me
Mhm.
of his confession. One, where he said he parked. Y'all
Yeah.
see, I've been there. And I'm telling you, where his car was parked that day that he committed these murders is nowhere near the Freedom Bridge, and it's nowhere near the side entrance near Miller's Farm. It's not. It's like a quarter mile either direction. And I'm just going to be real honest right here. When he committed these murders 7 years ago, he was a fat dude.
That was my first one. That was not a guy that was
Yeah.
out hiking by happenstance.
Mhm.
It's not a guy that's going to go hiking, and he sure isn't going to park a quarter mile away before the hike starts. He parked there and could not tell law enforcement why he did it. Well, we know why he did it. So his car wasn't seen, because this is a small town. Everybody at CVS knows his car. He could not take a chance of that car being seen. The second vehicle is the white van. Again, y'all, if you stand where the bodies were disposed of,
Mhm.
that is the only way that you would know you could see that driveway/road. It's the only way. You can't see it from the bridge. You can't see it from the cemetery. You can't. You have to be standing right there. How would Richard Allen know that if he didn't stand in that very spot? And
That's a
how
good point. Really good point.
white van got off work early that day? He wouldn't know any of that.
Mhm.
unless
Was
was
he
there.
Did he go, did they know, did he in the last, 5 years or however long is it, 7 years, since the murders, did he go back just to hike before he was arrested? Does anybody know? Like you just said, he was the bigger guy back then. I mean, you would think if you go once, you're gonna go again in the next
Probably, but nobody's
years
down
plus.
there. It's hard to really explain. I'm
Okay.
so grateful that I was able to walk there with Sheryl, because she's absolutely right with the car. And we saw where it was parked. It was Sheryl and her sister. And then we went to the bridge. And then we drove around on Saturday. No one was around on a Saturday. I'm sure he was
Mhm.
down there, but it's not a popular place. And I can't stress that enough. It's really, in my opinion, for teenagers. Nick McClellan said he walked the bridge once in high school. Becky Patty had never been there, ever. She didn't know how tall it was. It's
Oh,
not,
wow.
now it's been redone. Now it looks more acceptable and people are there to pay their respects to Abby and Libby. But before that, it was this abandoned railway that was high risk of someone falling through, which I'm shocked they didn't. So
Yeah,
it's not this place where
horribly
you would
dangerous.
see a lot of adults,
Okay.
in my opinion.
The original
Yes.
prosecutor grew up there, went to high school there, and had never been to the bridge.
Yeah.
So what was his reasoning for being there, I guess, in the first place?
He lived very close. We went to the outside of his house where he lived at the time. He lived very close. And the kids, I will say, I met one of Libby's friends she took her prom picture there. So it was like the backdrop of the bridge. So it's not like you're never ever there, but it's a Monday afternoon. Okay, 3,000 people, cut that in half. Let's say 1,500 men, 1,200 men in the city of Delphi or the town of Delphi. Who had off on that Monday afternoon? Who was down there at the bridge at that particular time? Nobody, just him. There was someone there later who took the stand, and he's part of the trail service, this older gentleman with a big camera around his neck. That was it, and that was later. He was the only one there at the time he said he was there, and at the time of Libby's recording. That's it, case closed.
From what I've seen and what I've seen and heard about this, it is really rough terrain. Like he would have had to have been familiar with the area because obviously, again, small town. Okay, he lived there, he lived near there. But from what I understand and what I see in the pictures, it's really rough terrain. There's no path or anything like that.
In the backyard where I grew up, I knew every tree. We called it going down the brook. I knew every tree, I knew every rock, because when we were kids, we'd go down there all the time. So we'd crawl under this one thing and then go to one sewer pipe, go under two trees, go to the next one. So he knew that area. He knew it. And he knew when he saw that van, he got interrupted. He knew where to go next. And he lived nearby. I'm sure he was there all the time.
Everything kind of points to him, regardless if you disagree with how we got
Cheryl,
to this
I think,
point.
and I just wanted to bring, because I'm feeling this here too in Delphi, and Cheryl may know this too, but it's so divided. I'm hearing it, and it's not necessarily people with animosity, but they're thinking that this guy did not get a fair trial. And I cannot tell you how different it feels. You feel like you're in a different universe when they say and it's weird, this divide. I've never seen it before.
Well,
you didn't cover Karen Reed then. Clearly, because, but yeah,
but
this is different. Exactly. This hits different for me because it's little kids. It's little kids, and that's where I'm like, okay, stop. This is like
with Karen Reed. You're right. I didn't follow that. Wasn't everyone kind of leaning towards not guilty, or it was a divide?
Well, this is the thing with Susan. If you even hint that she is not guilty or may not have done it, all of a sudden you are accused of witness intimidation at this point. Because
so there's some vitriol surrounding true crime these days. If you don't agree, it feels like politics. It shouldn't. I've said this before to Cheryl. Why would the families want an innocent man in prison and a child killer walking free? They have no skin in the game of who it is. They just want it to be the right guy, and I believe it is.
But it's frustrating that like we call it these YouTube journalists and all that sort of thing in there to muddy the water, because Delphi or Karen Reed, you want the Sheryl McCollums, the Lauren Conlins, and the Susan Hendricks there, because these are people that are going to give you the facts of the case. They're not just sitting outside. Like, again, the Karen Reed thing, there's people setting fires and smashing bottles and chasing people down the street, again, like people that are fired up for one reason or another, where Susan was telling me the last time we talked, there was Richard Allen supporters in Delphi, which I thought was unusual because, again, this case to me seemed kind of.
And isn't it funny? At one point, I felt like everyone is saying that Richard Allen on that side is innocent, but not Richard Allen. He kept confessing. His mother wouldn't hear of it. His wife wouldn't hear of it. The general public wouldn't hear of it. He's screaming, "I did it," over and over and over, to guards, to his mother, to his wife. And everyone's saying, "No, you didn't." And even these quote unquote fans are saying he didn't do it. And he's like, "Yes, I did." So it's bizarre.
You know what? I was going to ask Cheryl. She missed the beginning part of this when we were talking about the confession. Now, they were saying
Cheryl can talk about this more eloquent than I can.
It was isolated psychosis or something, which it's not like he was charged with stealing a loaf of bread. Then I could kind of understand some sort of thing. It's like, I don't buy for a second that under any circumstances that you would say that you murdered two little kids if you did. I can't wrap my head around.
Y'all, here's the deal, and I've done this a really long time. I've worked for the Department of Corrections. I've worked for, the sheriff. So I was in the major jail in Atlanta for 8 years. Here's what I can tell you absolutely without question. And you won't find anybody with the FBI, ATF, or Secret Service that will disagree with me. If somebody is in a psychotic break, they cannot tell you in chronological order what happened. Richard Allen said, "I visited my parents. I stopped and got beer and drank it. I went by the house and grabbed a jacket, even though it was warm. I went to the trails. I went to the bridge. I saw the girls. I followed them. I fooled with my gun. That's when I must have dropped the bullet.
Yeah.
I made them go down the hill. We crossed the river. We went up. I saw the white van. I got spooked. I slit their throats. I tried to cover them up with branches. Boom.
Yeah.
He could not do that if he was in full psychotic break. Not possible. And he said it over and over. He told everybody that would listen over 60 times he did it. Even when his mama said, they're messing with you, he said, they're not messing with me. I killed Abby and Libby. His wife, she said, don't say that. He said, but Kathy, I did it. Over and over, to the point Kathy just hung up on him.
Yeah.
But he
So-
was reality, y'all.
Why
Kat-
go to trial? Why did we go to, you know what I mean? Like, why,
Yeah.
if we had all these confessions, I guess I'm also confused now that if he was, I don't know, his wife maybe pushed for, like, I have no idea. Why go to trial if you already said I did it 60 times? Like, you know, I don't understand.
I don't
You know
know
what?
if he wanted to necessarily at first, and what do you have to lose? This is just me speculating, but I think his lawyer said, look, we can get you out of this by saying you were in psychosis, but they tried to explain away too many things, and the jury was
Yeah.
logical. They saw the evidence, and I believe now even more in our system because of the smart questions they asked. I felt
Amen.
good about it, even though it was nerve-wracking on the fourth day. I don't know much about the time of it, and I guess you can never really tell, but they asked smart questions, and they came to the right decision because the evidence was there.
One of the most alarming things that we keep talking about is how supportive his family was. Like, have you guys ever come across anything like this in the past? Again, like Lauren just said, why wasn't this, kind of an open and shut thing? And that his family kept sticking up for him, saying, no, you didn't do it. Because I can't think of a time when I've come across this before.
Well,
Sheryl, what do you think?
I've certainly seen it. And here's the deal. Kathy lost her job. She lost her home, but she has to still live in that town. She also, this is the person she's known since she was a kid. So she's going to support him if there's any chance he didn't do it. If there's any chance they can help him get out of this situation, that's what she wants to happen. I believe he is going to continue to confess. He's going to continue to tell little tidbits about what happened, what he did, what time he did it. He's not going to stop talking. I think this is going to give him an opportunity to talk even more to guards and other inmates, anybody that'll listen to him. He wants to unburden himself. He does, clearly. But again, here's the thing about Kathy and the daughter to me. Is there a chance they didn't recognize him? Is there a chance they didn't recognize that voice? Is there a chance in this world that she doesn't know how he was acting on the 13th? Because let me tell you something, 3 of y'all have spouses. When you open the door before they say a word, whether they are upset, whether they're happy, whether they're having a great day, whether they're, wanting to have some alone time with you, you know it.
I'm a guy. My wife is pissed off at me constantly. I'm well aware of it.
That means you have a wife. Relax. It's okay. I'm just kidding. We're all the same. No.
The way your children, hey, or acknowledge you, if they're upset, you don't even have to ask. You say, what's wrong? Because you already know something is wrong. So you're telling me she didn't know on the 13th he was acting unusual? And when she said to him, hey, you didn't tell me you were on the bridge, she knew.
She knew.
She knew he was having mental issues before this ever happened. The police had been to their house before this ever happened. None of this was a shock to her, except that he would actually murder children. I think that's the part she could not wrap her mind around.
Yeah. And the daughter, I know you don't know, but she took the stand, Sheryl does, but when there was always a speculation about the daughter, why isn't she coming forward? She's not saying much. And Kathy Allen, at a hearing I didn't attend, she looked at a local news reporter and said, that's my man when he was walking. That's my person. And that is like, you're right. They knew each other since 8th grade. She's in it thick and thin. So then when the defense called the daughter on the stand, she's, I believe, maybe, I don't know, mid 20s. She's married. She got on the stand. She did not look at her father, not once, maybe a quick glance and then away, but clearly not connecting with him at all. Kathy Allen wasn't in court. The only day she wasn't in court, I guarantee that that daughter, you could see she had a connection with Richard Allen's sister, looked over there twice. I guarantee she said, do it for me. She said, well, then my mother can't be in there. Clearly, they've taken sides. She didn't want to look at him. They said, what's your name? She stated her name.
Yeah.
Are you married? Yes. What's your married name? So I'm sorry, I have to ask you this. Did your father molest you? No. Do you love your father? Yes. Would you lie for him? No. And then a cross-examination, I think this was a brilliant thing to do to hold back here, because she is Richard Allen's daughter. And it was James Luttrell, and he showed pictures of Richard Allen during that time period, 2017, 18, maybe 16. They tried to get it in. The judge said no, because the defense objected, and they said there's no timestamp on that. That could be any time. So I thought was a loss because of the way he looks in court. He's shriveled up and skinny. They got it in another way by saying, is this your father? Yes. Is this your father? 4 pictures. And then all the jury got it, because if you don't know the story and you know Bridge Guy, the guy in court doesn't necessarily look like him, with the glasses on the head and the linen shirt and really skinny, doesn't look like him. But they just said there was no cross-examination about her father's character. But when she got down and walked out, not even a glance. So there's clearly some issues there. I believe that the daughter knows he did it, and the mother has taken the father's side. That's what I would assess based on, because there was a sidebar. So she was up there about 5 minutes with no one saying anything, I felt, for her, the daughter. So it was time for the jury to kind of look the nonverbals.
Susan, you're such a good storyteller. I was on the edge of my seat with that one. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was good.
I feel like I'm there right now.
That's how I feel about Sheryl, because I'm like, you're right with the parking. She's like,
no,
wait
Sheryl,
he's
Sheryl is an
down
incredible
here.
storyteller.
Yeah, he's parking down here. And it's so true if you see it in person.
I actually wanted to bend Cheryl's ear a bit, because again, I love talking with Susan about this, because I know you've dedicated a huge part of your journalism career to this case, and now you finally, you're going to write a footnote to your book.
Maybe someone would call it fanatical and a little nuts. I am happy to go back to Atlanta.
But all that matters is you were right. People are going to say Susan was right.
No, and there's always like these, for lack of a better term, sidebar to all of this. It is that what we see in court and the prosecution, there's little wins, and the defense. I'm so lucky, and I wish Sheryl could have stayed for the whole trial, but she was there the ballistics day with the bullet, and none of it made sense to me. And Sheryl was telling me after, and then think about that. If you don't know trials, they can be long and drawn out, and there's days that are boring with an expert for hours and hours and hours. And the families were there every single day, over and over, 17 hours a day, away from their jobs, doing this, swearing they'd be there every single day. So that was to take all of me outside of this and the complaints that it's cold and we have to wait. It's like, oh my gosh. So it came down to that, Sheryl.
It was unbelievable what I witnessed the short time I was there. And I'll tell you, for Susan to leave her family, her children, her husband, her pets, her mom and sister for a month.
I know.
And y'all, this was grueling. This was not, I'll just show up whenever. If I'm there at 10 o'clock, leave at 2 o'clock.
This isn't a South Florida case. Like, we're talking about like in the middle of nowhere.
And those deputies didn't mess around, Sheryl. They made it tough to get in on purpose.
You had to be, there the night before, stay all day. You couldn't even take a break and then go back. You had to do exactly, what was said and laid out. But, here's what I noticed, and if you don't mind, I do want to make a point.
Mm-hmm.
Susan and everybody that was there covering the case, I saw such professionalism. They were kind to each other. They worked as a team. They looked out for each other. They kind of explained to each other what was going on. They held spots in line if somebody did have some type of, little emergency break needed. But all of that said, the camaraderie, I was in awe. The other thing was, every single law enforcement officer there was kind, professional, courteous, helpful. Charlene and I had no idea where to park, but we didn't want our car towed. they came out and walked toward us, very helpful. Go right over here. It's no problem. Then when you come in, don't bring your cell phone. Extremely helpful, extremely the whole time. And you're talking about an agency that is small. They're not giving any vacation time right now. No anniversary, no birthday, no nothing. Y'all are going to be here, spit, shine, and ready. And they were not mad about it. It was unbelievable to me. The last thing, Becky Patty blew my mind. Every day she brought like banana muffins for everybody in the gallery. They brought seat cushions because those were those hard wooden benches. You were good for about an hour, hour and a half, and then it got a little much.
So true.
But the family was taking care of everybody and anybody. And so my experience in Delphi was overwhelmingly the human factor, which I found to be extraordinary. And there's some folks that have gotten some, bad comments made, but I'm telling you, every single person that I had a chance to talk to, they greeted me or I greeted them. We had great conversations. I was able to go to dinner, with Susan and really hang out with her, which was great. I saw Barbara. I saw tons of people. And I can't brag on everybody enough. But to me,
now that you're saying that, you're right. With Becky, that makes sense now. She would describe Libby as always thinking of others, remember? Like with the sticky notes and like always putting other people first. And so the whole family did. They're all like that. They're all like that. And some of the people online weren't as not, I'm trying to be kind here, but there was one person that's, that's what she does, shocks people on YouTube. And it's just rude, disgusting things about the family. And they didn't, Becky even whispered to me, like, I gave it to everyone. I could not. I mean, how nice is that to go out of her way to bring food to everybody?
That's right.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. I have to jump for a school pickup, guys, but I'm sad to miss the end of this because I need you to ask Sheryl about the bullet and the casings. So I can go back and listen and understand that too, if you don't mind. I'm like, let me tell you what to do, Derek, because I'm not
so good to see you.
But
Lauren, I love you. Thank you so much.
I love you guys all. I'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Well, I do want to talk about that, but there was another thing now that, we're put the finishing touch on the whole Delphi thing. Sheryl, we haven't gotten a chance to talk since you put the touch on the Wolfenbarger case. So again, congratulations. It seems like this year might be the year. Well, I don't want to say, a good year, but at least we're, clearing off some cases and, it seems like fantastic police work.
Well, the Wolfenbarger case was absolutely fantastic police work. I mean, that was 25 years in the making. Unbelievable. And August.
I don't know if you guys are in a hurry. I did want to touch on this quick because again, we never get enough time to chat. So maybe another 10 minutes if you're okay.
Yeah, I'm great.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I think it's the biggest case of my career.
Can you just refresh anybody who's not familiar with it? What happened?
Is that the mother and daughter that you had dinner with? I was at the hearing that day and I missed it. I was so upset. Yeah. Okay.
So, Melissa Wolfenbarger went missing. She was missing for 4 years. Her skull was found in the middle of Avon Avenue, but it was misidentified as a male. So it literally sat on a shelf. 4 months later, her arms and legs are found in separate trash bags. Again, they thought it was a Caucasian male, so they just put it all together and it sat there.
How far from her skull were they found?
25, 30 feet.
Okay.
But it was like in a wooden trash dump type area. So, time goes on and her father gets arrested for murder. And the police officer that arrested him, the detective, he says, hey, my daughter's missing. Will you help find her? Because I'm stuck here and you must be pretty good because you caught me. Ironically.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the detective said, yes, I will go, to his credit. Well, he goes and he starts looking and he's like, wait a minute. She lived right here and her husband worked right here and her skull was found in the middle. Like they live here, he works here, and this is where her skull was found and nobody thinks that skull is her. So they get dental records and sure enough, it's Melissa Wolfenbarger. So he ran it till he hit a dead end. Law enforcement ran it till they hit a dead end. And then years later, I'm giving a speech and I see a woman come in my peripheral, and she's dressed completely different than everybody else. Everybody else is all dressed up. She's dressed in like, shorts, a tank top, and a straw hat, like she'd been at the beach. But she's carrying an 8x10 frame and she's hugging it. Well, I mean, I knew it's either a mama of a missing person or a murdered, victim. And she comes up to me afterwards and she says, "This is my daughter, Melissa. She was beheaded in Atlanta. Will you help me?" Of course, I mean, how can I tell her no? And I said, "Look, I'm real busy with this event, but you come to my office next week." She said, yes. She walked into my office. Y'all, she had 2 gigantic binders where this was her murder book. And she put them on the table. And she said, "Listen, before we do any work, I know you already agreed to help me, but I've got to tell you something." I said, "Okay." And she said, "My husband is in prison for murder and I helped him." Okay. Well,
Stranger than fiction, indeed.
I didn't know this.
No.
yeah, not your average conversation. But I said, "Listen," I said, "the sins of the father, it's got nothing to do with it. Let's go to work." So we went to work and I worked on it about 7 years and we had somebody identified. But this was sort of like a Natalie Holloway case where everybody believed it was Johann Vandersloot. Everybody believed it was Christopher Wolfenberger. The problem is it was not an unsolved case as much as it was an unproven case. So we went to try to connect the dots to say, hey, can we take the evidence and will it lead us to an arrest? And it did finally last August.
I didn't know the whole backstory. Oh my.
That's unbelievable. That's
Well, there's a whole lot more,
Yeah.
but that's as quick as I can tell it.
well, you have to write a book. We need more books.
Yes, definitely.
For more Lauren Conlin, head over to www.popcrime.tv. Follow her on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Lauren_Conlin, and subscribe to her YouTube channel and check out her incredible podcast, The Outlier, wherever you get your fix. Follow Sheryl McCollum at 149 Zone 7 on Twitter and at Zone 7 on Facebook. And download her award-winning Zone 7 podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm sure there's an episode on the Wolfenberger case. And check out Susan Hendricks. Go buy the book. Down the Hill, My Descent into the Murders in Delphi, and check her out on Twitter at Susan Hendricks and on Instagram at Susan Hendricks, guys. That was absolutely incredible. Again, congratulations on, finishing all this stuff off. And I'm curious, I was going to ask you guys, what's next? What are you guys working on?
Getting back to Atlanta. No.
Sleeping indoors.
I want to say something about Zone 7. I'm not just saying this because Sheryl's on your show. It's the most amazing podcast, and she has a way of storytelling, and it's intriguing and soothing, just what you just heard here. So I would highly recommend it.
I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Like, obviously my guests make the show good, but Zone 7 and Joseph Scott Morgan's podcast are the 2 best true crime
They really
podcasts,
are.
hands down. I've heard them all. Those are the best.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate it, but my job is easy. I've got people like Susan, and all I do is turn the microphone on.
I do the same thing. I told you, we call it the cheerleader effect. I'll look good if I'm standing next to you, Lauren and Sheryl.
Yes.
I'm gonna say
I
that was
feel
a
the
great
same
show.
with Sheryl. I feel the same.
I could just sit here and be quiet, let you guys go at it, and I'll look good.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for your time. And again, congratulations on all your success and everything. And honestly, I'm a huge fan of both of you, and I can't wait to see what's next.
All right. See you guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you.